Hey guys, tonight we will explore the 10 fascinating facts about Anne Boleyn to discover who she really was. But warning, you will not survive hearing all 10 of these facts, as we will reveal them in order, from the mundane to the shocking. Especially fact number 2. And I want to know which of these 10 facts do you think is truly confirmed by history, and which are simply political slanders, as modern historians still assert, whether you agree or not. I want to hear your thoughts below. Share which facts you trust, which you doubt, and why. What surprised you the most? What percentage do you agree with of these fascinating facts? Let's discuss together and uncover the real Anne Boleyn. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And now, let me know where you are and what time it is in your local time zone. Now, dim the lights, turn on a fan to enjoy the gentle music, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. I take my leave of the world and of you all, and I heartily desire you all to pray for me. O Lord, have mercy on me. To God I commend my soul. These moving farewell words of Anne Boleyn, spoken before she ascended the scaffold, describe the tragic fate of the second Queen of King Henry VIII, who was beheaded in May 1536, on charges that now seem utterly groundless. Anne's story begins like a journey into the opulent yet calculating world of the Tudor court, where power and love intertwine at every turn. In the flickering candlelight against the grim stone walls of the Tower of London, Anne appears not merely as a woman of noble birth, but as a soul forged by hardship. Yearning to transcend the confines of courtly servitude, she spent many years absorbing French-style mastering, elaborate rituals, and the refined way of life at the Parisian court. Her command of languages and her knowledge of theology, culture, and the arts made her stand out among the crowd. Anne was not simply a court beauty. She was a scholar with a passion for reform, daring to dream of a church where the people could read the scriptures in the vernacular rather than listen to distant Latin translations. Upon her return to England, Anne brought with her an unmistakable elegance. Her glossy black hair cascaded over velvet gowns, her ivory skin peeking from beneath shimmering taffeta, and her eyelashes heavy with morning dew, commanding every gaze. Yet beneath that graceful exterior lay an iron will. She did not hesitate to challenge traditional courtly rules, maintaining just enough distance from King Henry to spark his curiosity and desire. Among countless courtiers, only Anne had the courage to express her dream of becoming queen, rather than resigning herself to the life of a mere lady-in-waiting. King Henry VIII, proud, yet ever hungry for glory, was quickly captivated by her singular presence. He sought not only a pleasing form, but a partner in political vision, someone to help him forge a powerful realm. Anne became his hope, the woman who could bear him a prince and leave an indelible mark on English history. Yet the path from mistress to queen was never strewn with roses. The Tudor court, with its crimson velvet drapes and glittering silver mirrors, harboured countless snares. Faction leaders from the House of Howard to the Boleyn lineage schemed to sway the king's decisions. Even flattering words soon turned into a double-edged sword, ready to sever Anne's heart when she no longer served their purposes. Anne's own cunning, each half-smile and delicate tilt of the head, became both her sharpest weapon and greatest vulnerability. And so, within the solemn confines of the palace, Anne Boleyn's tale opens with Henry's enthralled gaze and closes to the harsh clang of the executioner's axe. Every step she took from the grandeur of Paris to the shadows of London was penned in ink mixed with blood and tears. As night falls, Anne's story becomes a somnolent voyage, both romantic and sorrowful, leading listeners into a realm where power can crown you one moment and claim your life the next. And now, dear friends, we will embark on a journey to explore 10 fascinating facts, in reverse order from 10 down to 1, to gradually unveil each dramatic secret of Anne Boleyn. Each fact will serve as an essential piece, guiding us through the Tudor court, awash with power intrigue, and forbidden love. Most notably, fact number 2 is something everyone should know, for it strikes at the root of all conflict and altered the fate of the realm. Now, let us immerse ourselves in fact number 10 and step into the world where the first conspiracies were set in motion. Fact 10. Mary Boleyn, Anne's sister, was King Henry VIII's first mistress, before Anne Boleyn appeared as a dazzling star. Mary Boleyn, her elder sister, held a position of immense influence and scandal in the heart of King Henry VIII. Mary, born around the year 1499, was the firstborn of the noble family of Sir Thomas Boleyn and his wife, Lady Elizabeth Howard. From childhood, Mary was raised in both the English and French courts. Her beauty was celebrated for her golden hair, ivory skin, and full figure, the very embodiment of the ideal woman favoured by King Henry. At just 22 years of age, Mary was sent to serve Queen Claude of France. There she learned courtly dress, language, and etiquette. This experience bestowed upon Mary an extraordinary aura compared to her English court peers. Upon her return to England, she swiftly caught the eye of King Henry VIII and became his official mistress. The favour she enjoyed exceeded all expectations, from lavish jewellery gifts to sumptuous banquets and glowing praise from the nobility. The Boleyn family, cunning and ambitious, seized the opportunity to use Mary as a stepping stone to win the king's favour and discreetly pave the way for her younger sister. Mary did not possess Anne's deep learning or sharp ambition, but she had exactly what Henry desired: traditional beauty, gentle charm, and the power to make the king forget the burdens of state. She experienced a passionate but brief romance with Francois of Alençon, brother to King Francois I, before answering the summons back to England. Amidst the fierce competition of court life, Mary mastered the art of seduction, compelling Henry to lavish his time and attention upon her, even pausing in his duties to choose between Mary and Queen Catherine of Aragon. Everything began to change when Anne Boleyn entered the scene, only 2 years younger than Mary. Anne brought with her grand ambitions and knowledge gained from her years of service in France. The Boleyn family immediately recognized the untapped potential in their younger daughter Anne's profound learning, conviction for religious reform, and indomitable spirit. They gradually withdrew Mary from influence, diminishing her role as the king's royal mistress, and focused their efforts on Anne, whose intellect and thirst for power far outshone her sisters. The rivalry between the two Boleyn sisters is dramatically portrayed in Philippa Gregory's novel The Other Boleyn Girl, and its film adaptation. Mary, who once captured the king's heart, suddenly became merely a stepping stone for Anne's ambitions. The image of Mary quietly exiting the palace while every spotlight turned to Anne stands as a brutal testament to the ruthlessness of courtly power, where beauty and cunning serve as weapons, and women are mere pawns for men to manipulate. Mary's status as the first royal mistress laid the foundation for Anne's entire story. From her sister's conquest and downfall, Anne learned the true value of courtly love, not merely fleeting emotion, but a strategic move toward the throne. Mary remains an indelible milestone, reminding us that even those born into luxury must constantly struggle to retain their position. After Mary lost Henry's favour, she retreated from the public eye, married twice, but never reclaimed her former glory. In contrast, Anne applied the lessons of Mary's fate, choosing the right moment, maintaining proper distance, and expressing her ambitions shrewdly. As a result, Anne triumphed o'er her sister, rising to stand beside the king on the throne. While Mary, once the king's heart, became a poignant memory in the Tudor chronicles. Fascinating fact 9. French elegance that enchanted the king. And now we explore fascinating fact 9, where Anne Boleyn's French elegance reigned supreme as an invisible weapon. During 7 years of service to Queen Claude of France, who was crowned in the year 1517, Anne absorbed every manner and ritual of the Parisian court. She not only adopted their lavish style of dress, but also mastered the art of refined communication, speaking with grace while conveying authority. At every banquet held at the palaces of Blois or Fontainebleau, Anne acted as interpreter for the English, French delegations. Through this role, she scrutinized every aspect of hosting distinguished guests, from polite greetings and respectful bows to the ceremonial raising of the celebratory cup. The precision of her gestures and the warmth of her voice commanded respect from all who attended. It was this very poise that first created her halo of distinction, setting her apart from the throng of English ladies in waiting. Moreover, Anne meticulously curated each outfit she wore. Gowns of intricately embroidered lace, diaphanous veils, and the pointed-toe shoes characteristic of Paris, all were donned with impeccable taste. Her glossy black hair was swept into an elegant updo, adorned with fabric flowers and pearls that highlighted her refined features. A light application of powder and pale pink lipstick, combined with the flicker of candlelight, made Anne seem like a muse stepped out of a Renaissance painting. Each step and every tilting of her head exuded confidence, drawing the attention of even the most critical observers. Upon her return to England, Anne brought all of that identity with her. Henry VIII, accustomed to the traditional beauty of heavy cloaks and wide-brimmed hats, found himself overwhelmed by the sight of a woman who meticulously arranged her gown in the Parisian style. That striking difference piqued his curiosity. She was not merely a beauty, but a modern lady who knew how to captivate both heart and mind. The Boleyn family quickly recognized the opportunity. They commissioned portraits of Anne in proud poses and distributed them among the high nobility. Mary, her sister, who had once been favored, suddenly felt her own position waver as the spotlight shifted to Anne. The rivalry was no longer mere rumor. Anne sat closer to the throne than ever before. French elegance did more than adorn her appearance. It made Anne the first to bring a spirit of reform into the English court. She quietly shared with Henry the debates she had heard in France, where people discussed the right to read the Bible in the vernacular. These ideas captivated the king's thoughts, a realm not only strong in arms but also advanced in culture. After only a few encounters, Henry understood that Anne was unlike any other courtier. She wielded her style as a proclamation of soft power, a weapon unseen, but potent enough to sway emotions and policy. Every banquet, every candle, every red velvet curtain bore witness to Anne as a fresh, intriguing, and promising symbol. Gradually, Anne's French elegance became fashionable in the English court. Ladies of the nobility mimicked her dress cuts, adopted her refined makeup, and emulated her calm demeanor. Court music changed too. French madrigals grew popular, and the virginal, played in the Parisian style, echoed through the halls. Although Anne held no official office, her influence on court life was profound. Most noteworthy, Anne did not use her style to romanticize the past, but to unlock the future. She understood that, to win the heart of Henry, a king both proud and eager for innovation, French elegance was the key. It was just exotic enough to intrigue, yet sufficiently refined not to offend the conservative faction. Now, as night falls into stillness, let your breath slow and your spirit drift with every step Anne takes across Westminster's stone floors. French elegance guided her from the courts of Paris to the English throne, opening a new chapter in Tudor history. And now, as the candlelight fades and the silence deepens, we immerse ourselves in fascinating Fact 8, the deep-seated grudge Anne Boleyn carried from her first love, a love that altered her destiny forever. Fascinating Fact 8. A grudge against King Henry. Stemming from her first love, before she appeared as King Henry VIII's formidable mistress, Anne Boleyn experienced a secret, genuine romance with Henry Percy, the true heir of the Duchy of Northumberland. Henry Percy, at that time betrothed to the noble Lady Mary Talbot, was a young man of high standing and maturity, admired by many powerful families. Anne, barely in her 20s, loved him deeply and became secretly engaged. believing that their love could bring simple yet complete happiness. However, that romance was immediately and forcefully thwarted by the Boleyn family and the royal court. The ambitious Boleyns would not allow Anne to be bound by a marriage alliance lacking political advantage. They leveraged the power of Thomas Wolsey, both Lord Chancellor and the King's right hand, to intervene. King Henry VIII, eager to pursue new relationships, ordered Wolsey to annul the engagement, claiming he was rescuing Anne from an unsuitable match, when in truth Anne was robbed of her right to her own future. Percy, after the broken promise, was compelled to marry Mary Talbot in a forced ceremony devoid of joy. Anne, her heart shattered, watched the man she loved enter an unhappy marriage, left only with bitterness and anger. That profound sorrow did not extinguish her inner fire. Instead, it ignited her grudge against the king, the man who used his power to destroy a sincere love. From that buried grudge, Anne Boleyn began to sow the seeds of her ambition. She realized that only power, status, and the throne could compensate for her pain. Rather than surrender, Anne poured all her energies into crafting her image. She learned courtly manners, cultivated relationships with key figures, and skillfully used words to plant in King Henry VIII's heart a desire to conquer. Anne's strategy of playing hard to get, born of her pride and her grudge, quickly became her hallmark. She artfully feigned refusal, allowing the king access only when he was fully committed, in both love and politics. Indeed, Henry was enchanted by her pride. He felt unsettled and compelled to win over the woman who seemed ever out of reach. Each time Anne locked the front door, Henry grew more determined to find a way in, thus enhancing her power. That first love's grudge forged in Anne a highly refined tactical skill. She not only made herself desirable, but also inspired others to yearn for her company. In every conversation, Anne deftly introduced allusions to loyalty and the hurt she had endured, making Henry feel guilt and an urge to make amends. This ghostly play transformed her pain into leverage, elevating Anne from a coerced young woman to both a trusted ally and a formidable political rival. The Tudor court, where power and intrigue intertwined, witnessed Anne gradually earn the reputation of the most elusive lady of the royal household. Those close to Henry recalled that whenever her first love was mentioned, Anne would offer a wistful smile, as if to recall the past and warn of the future. That distant look commanded respect. Never underestimate the heart of a woman once betrayed. Targeting her grudge not only won Anne an emotional victory over Henry, but also sparked a wave of support among the nobility. They saw in her strength and determination the qualities required of a queen. Many quietly allied to bring Anne closer to the throne, confident that under her leadership, the monarchy would be renewed. And so, from her first love's grudge, Anne secured her status in the king's heart. She was not merely an ordinary mistress, but a keeper of influence, whom Henry had to negotiate with and indulge. That resentment became her strength, propelling Anne into the fiercest competition of the court, ready to employ any strategy to claim the crown. Fascinating fact 7. Playing hard to get to become queen. Not mistress, unlike her sister, Mary, Anne Boleyn refused to settle for the fleeting warmth of a royal mistress. She understood with quiet clarity that such a station, however gilded, offered only temporary devotion and no true standing. Thus, when King Henry VIII first confessed his ardour, Anne placed a condition upon their intimacy. She would share his bed only once he had formally annulled his marriage to Catherine of Aragon and wedded her as his lawful queen. For countless moons, Henry found himself entranced by Anne's sharp wit, striking beauty, and imperious grace, and yet unable to sway her to his side. This playing hard to get became Anne's most subtle weapon. She led Henry to raise his voice against the Pope, to rend the bond with Rome, and to seize the reins of both church and state in pursuit of marriage. As the king revelled in his newfound religious supremacy, chasing renown and the promise of Anne's favour, She patiently awaited her moment to ascend. Only once every ecclesiastical barrier lay shattered did she step from mistress into queen in a pageantry of crown and sceptre. Yet such daring carried its own perils. Anne knew well that her position depended entirely upon the king's fervour. Should Henry grow weary or resentful? She risked being cast aside as swiftly as she had been elevated. Power, she recognised, was only as firm as the shared interests that bound two hearts or two thrones together. Nevertheless, she gambled her security as a mistress for the precarious laurels of queenship. Driven by ambition and a thirst for authority beyond measure, in the hush of candlelit corridors, Anne's resolve spoke through her every gesture. She cloaked herself in silks of deep jewel tones. Each hue, a silent message, ruby red for passion, emerald for renewal, and midnight blue for sovereignty. Her words, soft as a lullaby, carried the steel of promise and the velvet of seduction. At court feasts, she flitted between dignitaries with an air of gentle aloofness. Yet every glance she cast at the king seemed to tether his thoughts firmly to her. Henry, enthralled, found himself alternately frustrated and consumed by the need to win her fully. His proclamations of religious reformation and break with papal authority became inseparable from his quest to claim Anne's hand. The splendour of royal procession and the fanfare of coronation marches all served her assent. Yet behind every triumph lay the silent question. Would this fragile accord endure Anne's strategy, worked precisely because she wielded her reluctance as a form of power? By withholding herself, she compelled Henry to negotiate with her on terms that transcended mere carnal desire. She became not an accessory to his crown, but its indispensable partner in policy and piety. Courtiers whispered of her influence over church courts and legal edicts, of how she shaped alliances, and whispered counsel at the royal ear. All the while, she maintained the veneer of distance that had first drawn the king like a moth to flame. But fortune is ever fickle in the dance of courtly intrigue. Those same courtiers who once bowed to Anne's quiet command watched with wary eyes, ready to pounce should her favour falter. Her sister, Mary, now eclipsed, lingered in the shadows as a reminder of titles lost and regained. The hard-won path from mistress to queen stood precariously between triumph and catastrophe. In those days, a single misstep could undo the tapestry of carefully woven alliances. Anne's refusal to yield too soon had become legend, how she had bade Henry prove his devotion by confronting the church, how she had demanded more than mere whispers in secluded chambers. This game of restraint, of poised elegance, elevated her to heights unseen by any Tudor consort. Yet it also sowed seeds of resentment among those who saw her will as too bold, her ambition as too stark. Nevertheless, Anne pressed on. She understood that to reign was to risk, and to risk was to live fully in the glare of power. Her coronation, steeped in pageant, bore the weight of every manoeuvre, every subtle refusal, every calculated glance. As she ascended the dais, the assembled nobility murmured of the queen who had almost slipped through the king's grasp, only to stand there, crown upon brow, as living proof of her own design. And yet, even as the choir's hymn faded into the vaulted ceiling, Anne's thoughts turned toward the fragile agreements that had delivered her to that moment. She knew that each day required vigilance, each decree, each public smile, each silent withdrawal could tilt the scales of favour. The same playing hard to get that had summoned Henry's greatest sacrifices could, if misused, invite his coldest rejections. Fascinating fact 6. A new breeze that did not last. Even the most intoxicating enchantment can fade with time. And so it was with Anne Boleyn's wildfire allure for King Henry VIII. After the grand coronation of 1533, when Anne at last claimed her place as queen, she found herself under an unbearable burden, the need to remain perpetually fresh in Henry's eyes, to bear him a son, and to manage the machinery of state with regal grace. Henry, drunk on his own supremacy, remember? He had already sundered ties with the Roman Church, confiscated monastic wealth, and executed dissenters soon discovered that power alone could not sustain passion. The sacrifices he had made, religious schism, seizure of church lands, beheadings of former friends, had drained not only his treasury but his goodwill, leaving him prickly and unkind. Meanwhile, Anne struggled to preserve her novelty. The role of queen consort demanded that she step behind the throne's pageantry, yielding the spotlight to her husband's sovereignty. On occasion, Anne's spirited interventions, a soft word in favour of the new Church of England, a discreet suggestion on matters of state, were taken by Henry as interference rather than support. Once their union was cast in the mould of foreign politics, the initial spark dimmed. Anne found herself targeted by reactionary forces, staunch Catholics, loyalists to Catherine of Aragon, and ambitious courtiers vying for influence. Rumours spread of her licentious court, of her insatiable thirst for power and favour, painting her not as a guiding light but a threat to the established order. Then the king realised the cost of his own rebellion. He had torn England from Rome's grasp to marry Anne. Yet she had not delivered his greatest desire, a male heir. Worse still, he sensed his wife's growing independence, felt himself under her sway rather than above her. When love sours and power is contested, Anne's radiance began to tarnish in Henry's view. His shift from adoration to aversion stands as the starkest testament to the fleeting nature of courtly favour. Yesterday's cherished consort can become tomorrow's convenient scapegoat. In those silent corridors of Whitehall and Greenwich, the Queen's morning glances in gilded mirrors must have carried a weariness far deeper than the nicest lady-in-waiting could fathom. She who once captivated the king's every waking thought now found gossip swirling around her like cutthroat winds. Her every breath measured, her every word analysed for signs of overreaching ambition. The same courtiers who hung on her every carefully chosen phrase turned their ears to barbs aimed at her unseemly boldness. Anne, for her part, faced an impossible conundrum. To remain relevant, she might have been tempted to indulge in dramas or scandal, but she knew too well the blade she wielded could turn on her own throat. So she retreated into a vigilant composure, offering the minimum of speech and the maximum of dignity. Yet the court's undercurrents would not be placated. The very qualities that had once enthralled Henry, her intellect, her zeal for reform, now branded her a meddler. At state councils, when Anne quietly slipped a line to a bishop, Henry, ever quick to temper, would wrinkle his brow and bristle at the insinuation that his queen knew more than she should. And yet, Anne's fall from favour was not immediate. For a time, court poets still dedicated verses to her wit, and foreign ambassadors praised her as a worthy queen in dispatches. But as months slipped into years, Henry's attention, once fixated on Anne's every flutter, wandered to new pursuits. The once smiling court grew guarded, to observers noting the queen's pale countenance and solemn gait where once she strode like a spring breeze. In hushed whispers, they spoke of Catherine's loyal daughters and the king's longing for a true male heir. The toll of this change was not merely political. Anne's gardens at Greenwich, once vibrant with tulips sent from Flanders, wilted along with the delight once lavished upon her. The tapestries she commissioned, scenes of worshipped queens and just impresses, hung as relics of a glory that had receded. The silence of empty corridors, once filled with music in her honour, now carried only the distant echoes of a power in retreat. In the end, it was Anne's own human frailty that sealed her fate. As Henry's devotion cooled, his advisers seized the chance to push her aside. Charges of impropriety, once dismissed as slander, gained traction. Parliament, ever compliant when royal favour turned cold, expedited measures to strip her of privileges. Within mere weeks, the throne room that had once proclaimed her queen was repurposed to celebrate her downfall. Thus ended the brief reign of a new breeze in Tudor England. Anne Boleyn's ascent had been meteoric, fueled by ambition, intelligence, and a spark that dazzled the realm. Yet, like a gust upon a summer's day, her charm dissipated as swiftly as it had arisen, reminding all who witnessed it that courtly favour is as fickle as the wind itself. As her silhouette faded from the palace's great windows, the court whispered a cautionary tale. The brightest flame can scorch only briefly before it diminishes, leaving behind the ashes of what once was fascinating. Fact 5. The spark that ignited the English Reformation. It was Anne Boleyn herself who fanned the flames of religious upheaval in England. When Henry VIII became infatuated with marrying her, he found in his path the unyielding authority of the Roman Church, which refused to grant him a divorce from Catherine of Aragon. Faced with this barrier, Henry chose to sever ties with Rome and birth a brand new national church. In the year 1534, through a series of statutes enacted under his direct influence, he proclaimed himself supreme head of the Church of England, thus ending all papal supremacy. These acts not only legalized his union with Anne, but also nationalized vast monastic lands, redistributed the kingdom's treasures, and dissolved countless abbeys. For the common folk of England, this bold move lifted the heavy yoke of foreign tithes. No longer were they compelled to sustain distant cardinals with every hard-earned coin. Instead, they felt a stirring of hope for a faith more accessible, a doctrine more attuned to the tongue of the people. The memory of famine, of being taxed into penury by a church that sent silver to Rome, still lingered in their minds. In their eyes, Henry's liberation of England from religious oppression became a social breakthrough. Though his primary aim may have been matrimonial, the ripple effect endured for centuries, giving rise to a distinctly Anglican tradition. Anne, meanwhile, stood at the heart of this transformation, reaping the rewards of her crowning glory and assuming the mantle of figurehead for reform-minded nobles. She lent her patronage to smaller priories, threatened with suppression, advocated for the translation of Holy Scripture into English, and used her courtly influence to foster humanist ideas imported from the Italian Renaissance. Wherever Anne's voice was heard in whispered corridors, it carried a vision of faith that mixed devout piety with intellectual liberty. Though she did not live to see the full fruits of these labours, her presence served as the stepping stone for Henry's quiet revolution, a profound reordering of European Christendom under English control. Imagine, if you will, the hush that fell in parishes when the shrines to St. Thomas of Canterbury were dismantled, silver chalices reclaimed for the royal coffers, and the chants of Latin choirs gave way to hymns sung in the vernacular. Anne's smile, worn during these sombre days, concealed a knowledge of the grand design she had helped set in motion. A simple prayer that once required a clerical intermediary could now be voiced by every literate household. The door to personal communion was ajar, and Anne stood watch at its threshold. Yet, this reformation was neither sudden nor unchallenged. Conservative clergy, bound by lifelong oaths to Rome, muttered of heresy. Catherine of Aragon's devout supporters decried the dissolution as sacrilege. But Anne drew strength from the conviction that true devotion lay not in rigid hierarchy, but in a faithful heart empowered by understanding. She quietly sponsored early translators, some nameless scribes who toiled by candlelight to render the Psalms into clear, resonant English. Their manuscripts circulated in hushed networks, passing from manor to cottage, planting seeds of doctrinal independence. In court, Anne presided as queen consort with a new aura. She was no mere ornament but a catalyst for epochal change. Nobles who once vied for her favour to secure titles now saw in her patronage a path to prominence in the emergent Church of England. Scholars dedicated treatises to Anne, lauding her as a pioneer of enlightened faith. Even foreign ambassadors, dispatched to the Tudor court, recorded in their dispatches the awe with which they regarded the Queen's support for these reforms. Of course, Anne's mortal life was too brief to witness the cascade of religious dissent, the splintering of monasteries into private hands, and the final codification of English Protestant doctrine under future monarchs. Yet, her role was undeniable. She was the match that lit a fuse, the gentle hand that tugged at the fragile threads of papal dominion, until they unravelled. Her ambition and her alliance with Henry combined personal desire with public transformation, demonstrating that individual influence could indeed shake the foundations of an entire spiritual empire. As we reflect on Anne's contribution, we might imagine her in the Chapel Royal, softly humming the new English psalmody, her eyes drifting toward the carved choir stalls, once occupied by Benedictine monks. In that moment, she embodied both the fading grandeur of medieval Christendom and the nascent promise of a more personal, more national faith. It was a reminder that history itself can pivot on the choices of a single figure, especially one bold enough to merge love's ambition with the zeal of reform. Fascinating fact 4. Failure to bear a son. Only a princess. In the tapestry of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn's marriage, no thread was more delicate or more fraught than the issue of childbirth. According to the unyielding expectations of Tudor tradition, a king required a male heir to secure his dynasty. Anne conceived in the year 1533, and on the 7th of September that year, the kingdom heard the cry of a child, Elizabeth, a daughter. For Anne, that moment was bittersweet joy at the arrival of her little girl, but sorrow in knowing she had not fulfilled the king's ardent wish for a prince. Subsequent pregnancies ended in heartbreak. Anne suffered miscarriages that cast a pall over her once radiant courtly presence. Whispers crept through corridors of Whitehall. Might it be that Providence disapproved of this union? When Catherine of Aragon had lost her own sons, one dying shortly after birth, and another stillborn Henry had accepted these tragedies as the inscrutable will of God. But with Anne, the king's patience frayed. Her inability to deliver a male heir was branded as incompetence, an unforgivable blemish on her sacred duty as queen. As autumn turned to winter, Henry's visits to Greenwich grew fewer. The sumptuous gowns of state occasions came to feel like prison garb, and the bright tapestries that once adorned Anne's apartments seemed to mock her. She found herself under constant scrutiny. The faintest flutter of nausea was examined for signs of life. The gentlest wobble of her gait, noted as a sorrowful reminder of promises unkept. Physicians were summoned in urgency, prescribing herbal concoctions and rituals to support Anne's failing fortunes. Still, each attempt ended in fresh despair. The Queen's physical pain was matched by emotional torment. Anne felt the weight of every gaze, every hush that swept through court when her misfortune was the topic of hushed conversation. Dissenting courtiers, sensing Henry's growing disillusionment, seized upon her failures, weaving rumours of adultery and political conspiracy. In their eyes, Anne's defect was proof enough that she was unfit to rule beside the king, and accusations that once might have seemed too cruel to utter were now spoken openly in royal chambers. Henry himself, torn between love and duty, could scarcely hide his disappointment. Where once he had marvelled at Anne's wit and grace, he now recoiled from reminders of her unfulfilled promise. He grew distant. His conversations with her reduced to formalities. Royal banquets passed, like lifeless pageants. The Queen's vacant chair beside him, speaking volumes about the distance that had grown between them. At the heart of this pain lay the ancient belief that the monarch's body must produce the monarch's heir. Anne, scholar and sovereign in her own right, found herself judged by the most primal standard. Her memory of past ambitions faded beneath the shadow of this singular failure. She had stoked the fires of reformation and ascended to the throne by her own cunning, and yet here, in the cradle of motherhood, she had faltered irrevocably. It was this ultimate lapse that sealed her fate. In the corridors of Westminster, legal minds and royal councillors conspired. They invoked her failure to produce a male heir as irrefutable evidence of her unsuitability The very court that had hailed Anne as an icon of progress now branded her a danger to the realm. The charges of adultery and treason, once whispered as idle gossip, were sharpened into formal articles of impeachment. And so, with the law as their instrument, Henry's ministers moved swiftly. Anne, who had once stood so boldly at his side, was now led away in chains under the gavel's shadow. Her miscarriages and the queenly expectation of a son had become the fuel for her undoing. The promise of Tudor continuity, embodied in a little princess named Elizabeth, was overshadowed by the urgent need for a prince, and in that desperate need, Anne found herself irretrievably lost. Fascinating fact 3. The swift trial laden with false accusations. In the month of May, 1536, Anne Boleyn was arrested on a startling array of charges: adultery, incest with her brother George Boleyn, conspiracy to assassinate the king. These allegations sprang forth from scattered pieces of evidence, confessions wrung out under duress, and the whispers of old enemies. No impartial witness was ever presented. Instead, a tangled web of coerced testimonies was stitched together to suit a predetermined conclusion. The trial itself was a marvel of haste. Convened under the merciless gaze of court scribes and Henry VIII's most loyal counsellors, it lasted but a single day. From dawn's pale light to the late afternoon shadows, the court sat in solemn pretense of justice. Yet every moment pulsed with the unmistakable rhythm of political expedience. The purpose was never to weigh truth against falsehood, but rather to expunge a queen whom the king and his conservative faction no longer deemed useful. Anne's eloquence in religious matters had alienated powerful bishops. Her failure to produce a male heir had deepened the king's disappointment, and her very independence marked her as a threat. In these brutal hours, the court became the very embodiment of a kangaroo court, a mockery of justice in which power trumped principle. The judges, hand-picked for their loyalty to the crown, delivered their verdict as a foregone conclusion. Anne, once the pride of Tudor England, was now labelled a traitor, a corrupter of morals, and an instrument of sedition. Only 2 sentences were pronounced guilty, and death by the sword. That evening, under the grey skies over Tower Green, Anne faced her end with gravity befitting a queen. A French swordsman chosen for his skill rather than crudeness raised the blade in one sweeping arc, designed to be merciful, compared with the clumsy fall of the traditional axe. In that single moment, the fire of her life was extinguished, and the world of Tudor court politics shifted yet again. To witness such an abrupt fall from the pinnacle of power is to understand the fragility of favour. Yesterday, Anne had presided at lavish banquets, her laughter weaving through tapestries and echoing against stone walls. Today, her name was used to justify the most ruthless exercise of royal prerogative. The same courts that had once celebrated her coronation now sanctioned her demise. In the hush of the aftermath, courtiers tiptoed around the empty throne beside the king. The tapestries that bore her likeness were quietly rolled up. Her jewels were claimed by the crown. The message was clear: Henry's will was absolute, and no station, however exalted, could withstand the tide of his displeasure. Anne's fate cast a long shadow, a warning to those who might seek to outshine the monarch or challenge his designs. Yet in the quiet corners of England, the story of that swift, sham trial took on a life of its own. In hushed tones, her ladies-in-waiting spoke of her dignity in captivity, how she maintained the composure of a sovereign, even as the noose of accusation tightened. They recalled how Anne had once used her influence to save minor priories from dissolution, championing vulnerable monks, and now those same institutions lay in ruin, their assets seized. The contrast sharpened the ache of her memory. Foreign ambassadors, too, recorded the sensational events in their dispatches. Some viewed the trial as a necessary purge of a troublesome interloper. Others muttered that the king's judgment was clouded by wounded pride. Yet none could deny the spectacle a queen. Deposed and executed within weeks, and an entire nation stunned by the abrupt reversal. The Tudor court, ever a stage for grand gestures, had performed its most chilling drama. In the months that followed, tales of Anne's final words spread through London's taverns and manorial halls that she forgave her enemies, that she commended her soul to God, that she died as she had lived undaunted. Whether these words rang true or were embellished by sympathetic tongues, they became part of the folklore that softened the memory of her trial's cruelty. Still, the hard reality remained. Power unchecked becomes tyranny, and the instruments of justice can be repurposed into tools of vengeance. Anne Boleyn's case illustrated how quickly a legal process can be corrupted when it serves the will of one man. The trial's speed and predetermined outcome served as a warning to courtiers, clergy, and citizens that Henry's favour was both a gift and a precarious tenure. And so, as you feel the weight of sleep drawing you down, recall the image of Anne standing before her judges, clad in her richly embroidered kirtle, her eyes serene, even as the gavel fell. Remember the swift sentence, the flash of the French blade, and the echo of empty halls that followed. Fascinating fact too. The 11th finger was nothing but a smear. And now, as promised to you all, we arrive at the best part, where so many misconceptions about Anne Boleyn will be laid to rest. So relax your shoulders, half close your eyes, and allow yourself to drift into this tale. In the years following Anne Boleyn's execution, one of the vilest rumours levelled at her reputation was the story of the 11th finger. It was said that Anne possessed 6 fingers on her right hand, a protruding, misshapen tooth, and a repulsive tumour on her throat, all branded as marks of a witch. This ghastly legend endured for centuries, leading countless souls to believe she truly bore such deformities, as if to justify her accusation as a sorceress and incite the public to reject her. The origin of this myth dates to Nicholas Sander, a fervent Catholic propagandist vehemently opposed to the Reformation decades after Anne's death. Sander penned his account based on hearsay and his own vivid imagination. Having never seen her in person, he described in lurid detail that Anne had 6 misshapen digits, a fang-like tooth jutting from her jaw, and a disgusting lump upon her neck. His words were spiced with sensationalism, crafted to portray her as a dangerous, loathsome witch in the eyes of conservative Catholics. Yet, when one examines contemporary sources, pages from ladies-in-waiting's diaries, court records of officials, to letters from foreign ambassadors, there is not a single mention of such horrific defects. Many witnesses who shared Tower of London chambers with her, who supped at Greenwich banquet tables by her side, never once noted any extra digit or blemish. Instead, they praised her supple figure, smooth complexion, and graceful deportment. Moreover, consider King Henry VIII's well-known exacting standards for beauty. It is inconceivable he would be enamoured of a woman bearing such conspicuous witches' marks. Henry favoured the traditional ideal golden locks, porcelain skin, a gentle countenance. Anne, with her sleek black hair and striking features, captivated him through intellect and courtly manner, not through supernatural deformities. Modern historians have thoroughly debunked the 11th finger legend. They regard it as a politically motivated slander, a tool to rationalize the removal of a queen who had outlived her usefulness. In that context, fabricators like Sander concocted this macabre tale to steer public opinion through blind fear, making it easy to discard any woman who dared challenge the conservative order. The rumour of the witch's mark did more than erase Anne Boleyn from history. It demonstrated how readily public perception could be manipulated. In the Tudor court world, women were mere pawns in men's games, vulnerable to the vilest attacks once their power grew. Attributing non-existent defects to Anne delivered a brutal blow to her dignity. while serving as a warning to any who might venture beyond the narrow confines of a woman's ordained place. So, did this part of Anne Boleyn's story, the tale of the 11th finger, surprise you? Do you believe it was nothing more than a calculated political falsehood? Please leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and if you found this best part truly eye-opening, give me a gentle like before we drift on into Fascinating Fact 1. Fascinating Fact 1. Mother of the Virgin Queen. And finally, it is time to unveil the best part, where many misconceptions about Anne Boleyn's true identity will be dispelled. Let your spirit drift with slow breaths. Half close your eyes and enjoy this tale. Although Anne Boleyn could not bear the 8th Henry, the prince he so desperately desired, she brought to the throne its most priceless gift, Princess Elizabeth I, born on the 7th of September in the year 1533. The newborn Elizabeth's cry rang through Greenwich Palace, like a gentle melody amid the storm of courtly intrigue, filling all who heard it with both joy and bittersweet longing. For Anne, Elizabeth represented hope, an indomitable seed of life amid the swirling currents of power and ambition. Princess Elizabeth first endured countless trials. She was cast aside from the line of succession, kept under confinement during Mary Tudor's reign, witnessed her parents' marriage shatter, and bore the haunting shadow of her mother's execution throughout her childhood. Yet in the year 1558, Elizabeth I ascended the throne, crowned as the Virgin Queen, a declaration of self-reliance and a reign unfettered by marriage. Her rule spanned 45 years, a period known as the Elizabethan Age, a golden era of English culture marked by Shakespeare, Marlowe, and triumphant voyages across the oceans. Elizabeth I's reign ushered in myriad brilliant achievements. She enacted a policy of religious moderation, reconciling Catholic and Protestant factions, established the poor law to care for the needy, and commanded the legendary victory over the Spanish Armada in the year 1588. Elizabeth I imprinted the title the Only Queen indelibly upon history, proving that a woman could govern a mighty empire without wedlock. Looking back, it was Anne Boleyn, despite her short and tragic life, who sowed the seeds of that great dynasty. She kindled the spark in her daughter, passing on to Elizabeth I the strength of spirit and the resolve to stand alone. Elizabeth I's birth was more than the outcome of political strife. It became a symbol of resilience, adaptability, and the Tudor woman's yearning for liberty. Anne, though she walked past the cold iron walls of the Tower of London, lives on, eternally through her daughter's legacy, a magnificent reign that glorified the English crown in the most splendid fashion. As you stir in this moment, feeling the arms of time cradle you, and this story, ask yourself, did this part surprise you? Do you find that it is indeed the best part I promised? Leave a comment with your reflections. Do you see Anne Boleyn, in her role as Elizabeth I's mother, as a true catalyst of history? And if you found this section fascinating, please give me a gentle like, so we may preserve this wonderful moment before drifting into a peaceful slumber. Dear friends, after our journey through 10 fascinating facts about Anne Boleyn from her sister Mary, who was Henry VIII's first mistress, to Anne's French elegance, her grudge from her first love, her playing hard to get strategy, the spark that ignited the English Reformation, her pain at failing to bear a son, the swift trial with false charges, the myth of the 11th finger, and finally her role as mother of Elizabeth I. I'm very curious, how do you feel about all of these? Which of these 10 points do you believe historical evidence has truly confirmed? For example, do you think Anne's French manner actually left Henry spellbound, as it is told? Or do you believe the story of her six-fingered hand was simply political fabrication? Just as modern historians assert, perhaps you view Anne's role in launching the English Reformation as an undeniable fact, yet consider details about her honey and cactus beauty regimen or her haunting dreams to be pure invention. And what about Anne's hard-to-get tactic? Was that really the turning point that elevated her from mistress to queen? Or do you feel she was simply fortunate in that regard? Not to mention the trial of May 1536, was it truly the brutal kangaroo court we often hear about? Whether you judge these facts right or wrong, I eagerly await your opinions in the comments below. Please feel free to share your perspective on each fact. Do you regard them as truthful or merely legends woven over time? Let's tally which points are strengths and which may be weaknesses in the story of Anne Boleyn that we have just explored. Tell me, what percentage of these fascinating facts do you agree with? Which point surprised you the most? And is there anything you would like to add or correct? Let's comment and discuss so that each time we revisit history, we deepen our understanding of the woman, her fate, and the mysteries surrounding this powerful yet tragic queen. So, we have just explored 10 fascinating facts about the tragic and powerful life of Anne Boleyn. From palace intrigues to her role as the mother of Elizabeth I, each fact has revealed a hidden corner. A little-known story about Henry VIII's second queen. But Anne's tragedy did not end there. After she departed this world forever, how did Henry, the husband who had driven religious reform and severed his first marriage fare, his decisions, moods, and policies in the days following that swift trial, will open another chapter of calculated consequence? So now, please join me for part 11, Henry VIII, after his wife's execution, to glimpse the depths of solitude and the political shifts of one of Europe's most powerful monarchs of the time. Part 11, Henry VIII, after his wife's execution. And now, as night falls upon the cold walls of the palace, let us drift into the mindset of Henry VIII following the painful tragedy of beheading his second wife, Anne Boleyn. Immediately after the French swordsman's blade fell upon Tower Green, Henry returned to Whitehall in a heavy state. A king, once resplendent with power, now appeared alone behind the rising smoke of incense and the solemn rituals of the royal chapel. The thunderous applause of celebration gave way to a chilling silence, broken only by the murmurs of court officials wondering anxiously about the uncertain future. Politically, Henry wasted no time, continuing his break from Rome. He ordered new statutes to tighten the crown's control over the Church of England and accelerated the nationalization of monastic lands. Prestigious abbeys suddenly became vaults for royal treasure, their hoards filling Westminster's vaults. Monastic assets were transferred to the royal treasury, funding military campaigns, lavish feasts, and the construction of new palaces. Perhaps to Henry, plundering church property served as a way to transform the sorrow of losing Anne into strength for his throne. In council meetings, Henry grew cold and solitary. He reduced the private provisions for his late queen's table and moved all of Anne's precious jewels into the royal coffers. Loyal courtiers feared even uttering her name, merely referring to her as the one who lost her earthly favour. Whispers in the council chamber grew more severe than ever. How dare the king slay his own wife, or does the king now regret it? But Henry, with eyes as sharp as steel, only responded with a nonchalant nod. Henry's psyche slowly eroded. Fits of wrath erupted throughout the palace. A guard who stumbled might be harshly rebuked. The portrait that once honoured Anne in the Great Hall was repainted over with bold red, and court musicians, once free to play joyful airs, were now restricted to solemn hymns. Henry became increasingly irritable, feeling unsettled by anything that reminded him of Anne. Emotionally, Henry soon turned to Jane Seymour, the woman he regarded as his treasure after the storm. Jane's gentle manner and discreet demeanour gave him a sense of security, a stark contrast to Anne's sharp intelligence. Their new bond blossomed when Jane cared for him during an illness, and word spread quickly, leading to their third marriage. Jane became his lifeline, helping Henry to forget the hauntings and pain of the past. Yet life was not just new romances. Henry's health also declined. Gout attacks tormented him each night, making sleep elusive. He drank more heavily, grew irritable, and lost his temper. The sight of the king sitting alone by a window, silently watching the flicker of a candle, became all too familiar to palace staff. They whispered, "Our Lord suffers pain both in body and spirit." Meanwhile, Henry's relationships with the European powers grew strained. Once he had justified his break from Roman Catholicism, he now found himself shunned. The Holy Roman Emperor, the Pope in Rome, and European princes blamed Henry for upending religious order unilaterally. Critical dispatches arrived regularly, warning of economic isolation. Henry, ever proud, fumed at the growing diplomatic rift, fearful of losing alliances and aid. Still, amid the chaos around him, Henry continued to reinforce his domestic authority. He granted lands to loyalists and staged military parades to demonstrate his martial strength. Courtiers, whether out of fear or genuine devotion, bowed before his majesty whenever he passed. They praised each new victory and celebrated the dispelling of Anne Boleyn's shadow, even as half the court's faces still bore the memory of a beautiful queen with a tragically brief reign. And thus, like all Tudor tales, this tragedy too drew to a close. In his final days, Henry sat quietly in his study, hand trembling as he signed edicts for posterity, ordering a grand funeral for Jane and granting Elizabeth I the title Princess Heir conferred in her mother's lifetime. Perhaps, deep within, Henry still harboured a flicker of regret for Anne, she who had given him the courage to defy the church in exchange for even a fleeting smile. And as the night's festivities in the royal court began to fade, so too did Henry VIII turn his back on Anne Boleyn's memory, to take the hand of Jane Seymour, she who became the sunlight, soothing his wounded heart. Let us step through the portal of history and immerse ourselves in Part 12, The Third Marriage and Anne Boleyn's Legacy, where Anne's influence continues quietly guiding the king's new relationship. Part 12, The Third Marriage and Anne Boleyn's Legacy. Immediately after the tragedy with Anne concluded, Henry sought refuge in Jane Seymour as a safe harbour. Jane, with her gentle nature and soft-spoken manner utterly opposite, Anne's sharp sophistication quickly became the court's favoured bride. The atmosphere in the royal hall softened noticeably, and life's pace slowed whenever Jane appeared. In candlelit rooms, accompanied by languid music, Jane did not need to feign regal bearing. Her innate grace spoke for itself, allowing Henry to find peace after the tumultuous storms. Yet Jane still carried Anne's shadow with her. Court banquets still echoed with the diplomatic skill Anne had introduced. Jane learned to deftly engage with ambassadors, sharing a vision of religious moderation. On one occasion, she exchanged a few words with the ambassador of Burgundy regarding a reform bill, surprising all by her quick grasp of complex matters. This, perhaps, stands as a testament to Anne's important legacy, that even though Jane did not stand shoulder to shoulder with the king in the Reformation itself, she was able to carry forward the seeds Anne had sown. Furthermore, Jane's relationship with Elizabeth I, Anne's daughter, was filled with poignant memories. Jane quietly shielded the young princess during perilous times. When Elizabeth had been removed from the line of succession, by the dim candlelight, observers noted Jane's tender gaze upon Elizabeth, her eyes brimming with a promise to safeguard her mother's legacy. Thanks to this compassion and support, Elizabeth I survived Mary Tudor's reign, poised for the glorious future that awaited her. In the official record, when Henry passed away, Elizabeth I succeeded him, providing the clearest proof of Anne Boleyn's enduring legacy. Although Jane sacrificed her life shortly after giving birth to Edward, she did not live to see Elizabeth crowned queen. Yet she had cared for Anne's daughter in her most vulnerable moments. Elizabeth grew up hearing stories of her powerful mother, of Jane's steadfast devotion, and of Henry, who had reshaped European religious history. All of this forged a steadfast icon. Elizabeth I, forever remembered as the Virgin Queen. Elizabeth I's court later continued to honour Anne Boleyn as an endless source of inspiration. In the days leading up to her coronation, Elizabeth requested that ceremony follow the classic style Anne had once preferred: floral embroidered silk garments, a delicately crafted crown, and prayers recited in the vernacular tongue. Courtiers whispered that this was Elizabeth's way of paying tribute to her mother's legacy. skillfully weaving a tumultuous past into a triumphant future. Simultaneously, Elizabethan scholars wrote about Anne Boleyn with rare reverence. The first biographies emerged in the early years of Elizabeth I's reign, portraying Anne not merely as a tragic figure, but as a woman who led a religious and social revolution. Those pages remind posterity that Anne's heritage extends beyond her role as Elizabeth's mother. It lives within the heart of the English people through the spirit of freedom and independence she ignited. And in the final moment, when we look back on the journey from Anne to Jane, and then to Elizabeth I, we see a wondrous chain of connection. Anne Boleyn's legacy was not confined to a persecuted beauty. It was the guiding light for 3 generations: Anne, who planted the seed; Jane, who kept the flame alive; and Elizabeth I, who illuminated the English crown. And as Elizabeth I's reign ushered in a new golden age, the echoes of Anne Boleyn's life continued to reverberate through art, politics, and culture, from the hushed corridors of the Tudor court to the stages of the globe. Her story took on new forms and stirred fresh debates. Let us now drift into part 13, The Enduring Shadow of Anne Boleyn, where we explore how her legacy shaped not only her immediate successors, but also the wider tapestry of British history and culture. Part 13. The Enduring Shadow of Anne Boleyn, long after her tragic end. Anne Boleyn's silhouette loomed large over the Tudor dynasty. Poets of the Elizabethan court composed verses that, while celebrating Queen Elizabeth, quietly honoured her mother's indomitable spirit. In the candlelit chambers where courtiers gathered to recite sonnets, references to a dark-haired queen with fiery wit slipped into works that ostensibly praised Elizabeth alone. Through these veiled allusions, Anne's memory gained a subtle immortality, her voice carried in every line, even as her name was seldom spoken aloud. On the public stage, dramatists seized upon Anne's turbulent life as fertile ground for tragedy. The early versions of what would become Shakespeare's history plays featured a cunning Boleyn who torments Henry with both intellect and guile, though Shakespeare streamlined many characters for dramatic effect. Audiences sensed in his portrayals the complexities of real human ambition and vulnerability. The lines spoken by characters who lamented that royal rose plucked too soon struck chords of empathy, reminding theatregoers that Anne was more than a pawn. She was a woman of remarkable agency. Visual artists, too, found inspiration in Anne's story. Miniaturists at the court painted her likeness, perched beneath a Tudor rose, while woodcuts circulated in pamphlets depicting the Queen as either saintly martyr or crafty enchantress. Depending on the publisher's sympathies, these images, often crudely hand-coloured, shaped popular perception across England and beyond. Sailors carrying printed broadsheets to foreign ports spread the legend of Anne Boleyn, ensuring that her name travelled farther than any Tudor courtier could have dreamed. By the reign of the Second Elizabeth, antiquarians began to collect relics, said to belong to Anne, fragments of her prayer book, bits of lace from her gowns, even a single glove rumoured to have belonged to her. These items were displayed in noble households as prized curiosities, symbols of a bygone era when a single woman had altered the course of church and state. Their owners whispered that holding such relics could impart a sliver of Anne's boldness and resolve. Into the 18th and 19th centuries, historians grappled with Anne's contradictory image. Romantic novelists cast her as an emblem of doomed love, a tragic heroine, unjustly sacrificed by a cruel monarch. Victorians, cautious of blunt political criticism, admired her devotion to Protestant ideals. They praised Anne's courage in pushing for scripture in the vernacular, even as they lamented the moral ambiguities of her courtship with Henry. In modern times, film and television have revisited Anne's saga again and again, each retelling reflecting contemporary concerns. Post-war audiences empathized with her struggle for female autonomy amid rigid patriarchy. Later decades saw her as a proto-feminist, challenging male authority. Documentaries contrasted the opulence of her surroundings with the brutality of her fate, prompting viewers to question the justice of her trial and execution. Beyond the arts, Anne's legacy endures in political discourse. Scholars cite her role in the Reformation as a pivotal example of how personal relationships can trigger systemic change. Legal historians reference the kangaroo court that condemned her when debating due process and the perils of absolute monarchy. In classrooms around the world, and students learn of Anne not merely as Henry VIII's lost love, but as a catalyst for worldwide religious realignment. Even in popular culture, Anne's name evokes complex associations. She is the alluring dark queen in fantasy novels and the shrewd diplomat in strategy games. Cosplayers at history conventions don gowns of black and gold Boleyn trim, while podcasts revisit her letters and speeches with fresh analysis. Each new generation rediscovers her story, finding in it resonance with questions of gender, power, and identity. Finally, we arrive at a profound realization. Anne Boleyn's most enduring legacy may lie not in the direct line of Tudor succession, but in the myriad ways her life has been retold and reinterpreted. She lives on through every tribute, every reinterpretation, every whisper that calls her name with admiration or regret. Her shadow stretches across centuries, a reminder that one person's courage or ambition can echo far beyond a single lifetime. As your eyes grow heavy and the candle's flame flickers low, carry with you this thought: Anne Boleyn's story is woven into the fabric of English history, not just in political tomes, but in the hearts and minds of all who hear her tale. And so, with that gentle consideration, we close this chapter, letting sleep guide us through a Tudor night where legends never truly fade. And that completes our journey through the turbulent life of Anne Boleyn, from courtly secrets, her bittersweet first love, and the playing hard-to-get strategy, to the harrowing miscarriage of justice in her trial, the legend of the 11th finger, and finally, her role as the mother of Elizabeth I, with Anne's presence still lingering alongside her two successors. What value and message does this video offer us? First, we recognize that history is not merely a dry chronology of dates and events. It is the story of human beings driven by desire, ambition, and suffering. Anne Boleyn was neither simply a victim nor a villain in legend, but a living testament to the power of a woman's will and intellect in a patriarchal era. Next, through Anne's life, we learn that power can grant you a crown, but it can also strip away your life in an instant. Her dramatic highs and lows remind us that unchecked ambition can exact a heavy price, and when power becomes absolute, justice can be manipulated into a tool of oppression. Third, the video also reminds us of the importance of legacy. Although Anne departed too soon, she helped lay the foundations for a prosperous dynasty. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, stands as proof that a single voice, a small revolution, can echo through the destiny of an entire nation. Anne's legacy extends beyond giving birth to Elizabeth. It resides in the spirit of reform, courage, and determination to transform the religious and social landscape of England. Finally, we draw an important lesson: always scrutinize baseless myths and approach history with clear eyes. The legend of the 11th finger demonstrates how easily public opinion can be swayed and how powerful women are often targets of malicious smears. Comparing rumor with historical evidence encourages us to investigate for ourselves and distinguish fact from fiction, rather than accept every whisper as truth. From this video, we learn that history contains many hidden corners, and uncovering the truth requires patience, critical thinking, and respect for primary sources. Power, love, and politics are tightly intertwined, and every decision can have long-lasting consequences. True legacy lies not only in policies or laws, but in the hearts and minds of future generations, as Anne continues to live on in Elizabeth's reign and in the collective consciousness of humanity. I hope that after watching this video, you will gain a more nuanced perspective on Anne Boleyn and the Tudor era, and come to appreciate the historical forces that shaped our society today. If you found this video helpful, please share and comment so we can continue the discussion. Thank you for watching. and I look forward to seeing you on our next historical journey.